How did a 3-year-old boy solve his own murder? In a region near the border of Syria known as Golan Heights, a boy says he remembers being murdered. At first, no one believed him. That is, until he led village elders to the spot where he remembers being buried. Mixed in with a group of village elders was a man by the name of Dr. Eli Lash. Dr. Eli Lash is known in Gaza for developing a government medical system. Lash witnessed all of these events. The villagers dug up the spot where the boy says his former corpse remains, and sure enough, there was a skeleton there. Mysteriously, a large axe mark on the skeleton corresponds to a birthmark on the boy's head. The boy says he was murdered with an axe, and then led village elders to the spot where the murderer buried the weapon. Sure enough, they dug up an axe. The boy then led people to the village he was from in his past life and told them of his previous name. When people of the boy's former home village were asked about a man going by this name, they said the man had disappeared 4 years earlier and never returned. Remember, the boy was 3 years old. But strangest of all, the boy recounted exactly who his murderer was. When the boy confronted his killer, the man's face turned a pale white and he started acting very suspicious. Once the boy led elders to the exact spot of his corpse and the murder weapon, the killer gave in and admitted to the crime, for which he ended up being charged with. Is the boy a product of reincarnation? Are we all perhaps reincarnations of our past lives?
גלגול נשמות היא תיאוריה שקיימת בכל המסורות הרוחניות בצורה פחות או יותר נסתרת. יש מסורות רוחניות שבהן התיאוריה הזו גלויה מאוד, כמו למשל בהינדואיזם ובודהיזם, גם בדת הדרוזית. בדתות אחרות, כמו ביהדות, היא יותר נסתרת. זה שייך לסוד, למשל הקבלה ביהדות. בנצרות זה גם היה במאות הראשונות, למשל. כך שזו תיאוריה שמאוד נפוצה, ומחקרים מגלים עכשיו שיש כ-70% מכל האנושות כיום שמאמינים בתיאוריה הזו.
הדמים בפיגוע חבלני בבית הממשל הצבאי.
נוהד אבו רוקון, זיכרונו לברכה, איש משמר הגבול בן 38 מעוספיה, נטמן בחלקה הצבאית בבית הקברות בעוספיה.
תמיד כשהילד קטן אנחנו זוכרים היה לספר משהו. זאת אומרת, מה קרה שם בדיוק ברגע האחרון?
אם אני وقفت تحت على الكنيسة عند الباب تحت وهو طلع الطابق الثاني من الشباك صار يحكي معي من الشباك صار يحكي معي صرنا نحكي يعني ما حسينا ولا فاتت سيارة ما شفناش احنا السيارة فاتت سيارة وفقعت وسمعنا صوت عالي انه وفقع كل البنيان مرة واحدة قام يوقع لحدي من الشباك لتحت ما حسيت ولا كل الحجارة عليه وصار ينزلوا دم صرت اقول له ما تموتش سعيد ما تموتش كمان مات وبعدين انا بعد يعني ماني أديب אני האיש שהיה בגלגול שעבר נוהד ואני שירתי במשמר גבול ונפטרתי בלבנון בסור.
זה התחיל בערך כשהוא היה בערך בגיל 3, בן 3. היה מבטא שמות בצורה נכונה ואז כל הזמן הוא רצה כביכול לפגוש עז.
הם לא ידעו מי זה העז, הם חשבו שהעז זה השכן שלנו, שקוראים לו אבו לעז. אז
כשבאה אחותה של נבילה אלינו וסיפרנו את המקרה הזה וידענו שהיה אירוע בחודש נובמבר והבן שלי נולד בחודש נובמבר. אז היא הבטיחה לבדוק את זה אצל המשפחה של נוהד אבורקי זכרונו לברכה שנהרג, והבן שלו במקרה קוראים לו גם עז.
כשהייתי בן 3, אמרתי להורים שלי שאני רוצה את הבן שלי. באנו משפרעם לעוספיא, ואני ואמא שלי והדודה שלי, הלכנו ברגל לבית שלי שהיה.
אני חושבת שהלכנו ביחד, הוא רצה שהוא יראה לי איפה הבית של רונט. הוא בא הביתה, נכנס לי כאן, כאילו זה הבית שלו. הוא הכיר את המקום, למרות שזה היה לא שלו, אבל הוא הכיר את זה פה. אז גרו אנשים אחרים. הוא התחיל לשאול איפה הדברים האישיים שלו, איפה המדים, הוא התחיל לחפש, אשתו הייתה פה, גם השכנים פה, אנשים, הוא רצה להראות.
יום אחד אני יושב פה, נכנסו אליי אדיב, שהיה ילד קטן, יושב בגיל 3.5, אבא שלו ואמא שלו. הוא איכשהו נכנס, אמר להם זה נזי. ישבנו פה כמה אנשים וזה, הוא זכר אותי ואמר זה נזי. נוהד, היינו, אנחנו באותו גיל כמעט, הוא קצת מבוגר ממני והוא בן דוד שלי. והיחסים בינינו היו הדוקים.
הטיולים אני נזכר בהם, כשהלכנו לטבריה וישנו על הדשא.
על הדשא, על החוף.
שאל את רונט בפגישה הראשונה אם היא זוכרת אותו.
זאת רונט. זאת האישה שלי שהייתה בגלגול הקודם.
אנשים חשבו שכן נוהד חוזר, לא ידעו שזה ילד קטן שהוא אומר שהוא נוהד, שהוא בא, הנה זה הבית שלי, וזה הדברים האישיים שלי, וזאת אשתי, זה הבן שלי, והוא החזיק ביד שלו ולא נתן לו ללכת. אז התחילו אנשים פה להגיד לו זה לא עז, זה עז על ילד אחר, להצביע על ילד אחר, הוא לא נתן לאף אחד לשכנע אותו. לי אפילו, אמא אל תאמיני להם, זה הבן שלי, זה הילד שלי, זה שלי, זה עז שלי, ואני מכיר אותו טוב, והוא לא נתן לאף אחד לעבוד עליו או לרמות אותו.
זה הבן שלי, עז.
אני מרגיש זה אבא, ואני מאמין בגלגול נשמות. וככה אלוהים אמר.
בשיחה עם אדיב אני מאוד התרשמתי מזה שמדובר בילד רגיל, ילד בן 12 שיש לו את התחביבים שלו, את הספורט, את הבית ספר, את החברים, החברות גם שמעתי, כך שמדובר בילד שמציאותי מאוד, שחי את ההווה שלו. השתכנעתי לחלוטין שלא מדובר בפנטזיות או בדמיון שלו לגבי כל הסיפור הזה על הגלגול שלו, אלא שמדובר בזיכרונות אמיתיים.
אני צריך לזכור שהייתי גדול, עכשיו אני קטן, ויש לי בן. זה משהו
On March 3rd, 1945, a 21-year-old Navy fighter pilot on a mission over the Pacific was shot down by Japanese artillery. His name might well have been forgotten, were it not for the remarkable, some might say unbelievable story of a little boy named James. But then, when he was 2, the planes James loved suddenly began to give him frequent and frightening nightmares.
I'd wake him up and he'd be screaming and he'd always be laying on his back kicking his feet up at the ceiling. And I'd say, baby, what were you dreaming about? He'd say, airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out.
They sound like typical kiddie nightmares, but Andrea says they went on the same way for months. Maybe too much TV. But James was just 2 and his parents say only watching Barney and Teletubbies.
Teletubbies!
And Andrea and Bruce say they weren't watching World War II documentaries or conversing about military history. This is an F-18?
No, that one.
So what explains the nightmares and James's strange obsession with airplanes?
I talked to my mom about it a lot of times, and my mom had said maybe he's remembering a past life.
What did you say?
Politely, baloney.
Well, having a past life is not the initial conclusion that you come to. You try and figure out any other way he could have. Did he see anything? Has there been anything on television, anything that we've discussed?
But as time went by, Andrea didn't know what to believe. Here's James at age 3 going over a plane as if he's doing a pre-flight check. He would continue to say and do things that were puzzling, like the time his mom bought him a toy airplane.
And I said, oh, look, there's a bomb on the bottom of it. He said, that's not a bomb, Mama, that's a drop tank.
A drop tank?
I'd never heard of a drop tank. I didn't know what a drop tank was.
His parents say between the ages of 2 and 4, James would reveal extraordinary details about the life of a former fighter pilot, mostly at bedtime, when he was drowsy.
Bruce said, what happened to your plane? He said, it crashed on fire. And Bruce said, why did your airplane crash? And he said, it got shot. And Bruce said, well, who shot your plane? And I'll never forget the look on his face. He went, oh, the Japanese!
Still, despite these extraordinary stories, Bruce remained dubious. Almost to prove they couldn't be true, he began to piece together the details James was sharing. And what he found, he says, shook him to the core. For in many instances, the stories appeared to match the facts. James seemed to be recalling real events, real people, in the life of a man who'd been dead for almost 60 years.
Bruce had always said, what kind of plane did you fly? And he said, a Corsair.
Yeah.
He said a Corsair?
He said the word Corsair.
Mm-hmm.
Not only did James remember flying a Corsair, he demonstrated knowledge of the plane's peculiarities, like the time he was flipping through a book about planes when he was 4.
And he got to the Corsair and he said, that's a Corsair. And he goes, you know what? They used to get flat tires all the time.
In fact, historians and pilots agree that the plane's tires took a lot of punishment on landing. Of course, this is a fact that could easily be found in books or on TV. But then, James began to offer up the kinds of specific details his parents say are harder to explain away.
Another night, Bruce had come in and he said, do you remember where your plane took off? And he said it took off of a boat. Do you remember the name of your boat? Natoma. Do you remember what your name was? And he'd always say, James. His name is James. It never really occurred to us. We thought he just wasn't understanding the question. So I said, do you remember any friends or anyone else that you flew with? And he said, Jack Larson.
Bruce began doing some research. Almost immediately, he discovered that the Natoma was an actual ship, a small aircraft carrier in the Pacific called the Natoma Bay. And Jack Larson, the Navy buddy little James recalled? Well, it turns out there was a pilot named Jack Larson who served aboard the Natoma Bay. In fact, he's alive and well and living in Arkansas.
And it was like, holy mackerel. I mean, really, you could have poured my brains out of my ears. And I just couldn't believe it.
And there were more clues. Around this time, James began signing crayon drawings and other artwork, James 3.
One day I asked him why he's calling himself James 3. It was because I'm the third James. And every once in a while you ask him that today, and he'll still say the same thing.
And one day, while leafing through a new book about the Battle of Iwo Jima, Bruce turned to an aerial photo of the Pacific Island. James was seated nearby.
He pointed to it and he goes, Daddy, that's where my airplane was shot down. And I said, what? That's my airplane got shot down there, Daddy. And I just went blank. I couldn't say anything.
By then, Bruce had become a man possessed, searching the internet, combing through military records, and interviewing men who served aboard the Natoma Bay. Finally, a breakthrough. He learned that there was just one pilot from the squadron killed at Iwo Jima. That pilot, James M. Houston, Jr. Is this why little James was calling himself James 3?
It just crystallized in my mind. This has to be who we're talking about. You know, my meter of skepticism was starting to go over toward belief.
When little James would describe being shot down, he told of how his plane had sustained a direct hit on the engine.
We had an airplane, and I said, well, can you show me where it was? And he pointed right up to the front of the engine.
That's what makes this man's story so intriguing. His name is Ralph Klarber. Klarber was a rear gunner on a TBM Avenger that flew off the Natoma Bay. On March 3rd, 1945, he took part in a raid near Iwo Jima. As it happens, Klarber's plane was right next to the one flown by James M. Houston, Jr. It was to be Hugh's last mission before leaving for home the following day. As Klarber recalls, the sky was thick with enemy flak.
We experienced pretty heavy anti-aircraft fire, but this was the most intense that I experienced at any time.
Suddenly, a flash near the nose of Houston's plane.
I saw the hit. I would say he was hit head-on, yeah, right on the middle of the engine.
Just as little James had described it.
But what do you believe now about your son James?
I believe that he had a past life. I believe that in his past life he was James M. Houston, Jr. And he came back because he wasn't finished with something. And that's essentially what I believe.
Dear Bruce and Andrea.
And he's not the only one. This past October, the Leinegers received a letter from a woman named Ann Barron, the sister of pilot James Houston. Andrea and Bruce had contacted her about their little boy. Barron heard about what young James was saying, and she believes.
All of this is still overwhelming. I can only imagine how it has affected you, but I believe, with my love to you, Anne. The child was so convincing and coming up with all these things that there's no way in the world he could know, unless there is a spiritual thing.